Hi everyone, my name's Albion and I'm an addict.
Hi Albion.
I'm actually grateful that I'm sitting here. It's been a very hectic day. I've got to get a bit kind of clean with myself because it's been eating up at me. Raf asked me to share in this meeting a while back, and it's been the only share I haven't been able to make that I've actually just committed to, and I couldn't make it because I was ill, and then he asked me to do it again, and I was travelling for work, so I asked my neighbour who shared here a couple of weeks ago on step 7 if he could do it, and then he fucking fell ill. I was like, mate, you're making me look bad, so I'm glad I'm here because my head's been really beating me up over that for quite a few months. And work was really busy. It's Friday, I work in a corporate environment. And I forgot that I'd promised to take my eldest and my parents for the weekend, so I was rushing around like a headless chicken, and I walked in here, tried to centre myself, and I've literally just heard one person talking about washing up fucking coke, another person talking about I can't do crack at work, and I was just like, okay, I'm with my people, I feel kind of calm, because I still had the kind of the mask of work and a corporate environment. I literally just felt really at ease, and I just can't slow myself down, and I'm glad it's a kind of lights off meeting because that was my first experience in the NA when I came in about 8.5 years ago. It was a candlelit meeting. I went into a place I didn't want to be in to kind of keep a family together. I really also was okay to lose because drugs had really taken priority. With a massive vegan, I walked in and there was this tiny little box room with 8 people and just candles in the middle. Like, what? This is like a seance. What is this? But I really get to appreciate it because it allows them to kind of really relax. You know, I have a head that's really, really fast and really, really loud. So when I come into these rooms and it's an environment like this, I can just go, but yeah, I'm grateful to be here. And probably actually when I first came in, this area probably, or the name of this area was one of the main justifications I used to use for my life being shit. Unfortunately, I support the team that has the name of this place, which has been a burden to my life, and it's probably kind of one of the areas of my life that I still cause harms over, where I allow things that are out of my control and don't really, kind of add anything to my life to kind of dictate on how I behave. One bad thing kind of send me sideways, but I'll very quickly introduce myself before kind of talking about my experience around step 8. So I was born and raised in Albania. I moved to the UK when I was 13. And the irony about me is that I'm probably the only Albanian you guys know that used drugs rather than sold them. That is also the case in my family. I am the only one that used, and I am kind of scapegoated as the bad one, but that's okay. But it made it much more difficult for me to come into these rooms. I come from a culture where addiction really doesn't exist. It's a country that I really struggle when I travel to go and visit family. And there's been no meetings up until about 6 months ago. And I was asking them, I said, has there ever been an Albanian that's actually walked into these rooms? They went, there was once a guy. I said, did he ever come back? I said, no. Because I come from a culture where really opening up about your feelings, or that you struggle, or you're kind of really depressed, it just doesn't exist. You're a man, go a pair of balls, work, provide for your family and shut up. And I've had to really kind of learn to accept that and move on, because I used to really struggle with that in early recovery, especially with my old man, which I have a great relationship with now since I've come into the rooms, because I understand where he comes from. I used to really berate him, and I used to really use my anger towards him quite a lot during my using, because he wasn't like one of my English mates' dads. I used to tell him all the time, I love you, I'm really proud of you. My dad was just like, yeah, well, I'm going to work for you to go to uni, to have a decent job, so get on with it. What do you want? I'm not going to hug you. And I never understood until I kind of came into the rooms, and my relationship, it was a relationship where I would sit down with this man for 5 minutes, I would feel instantly uncomfortable in the same room, where I just wouldn't say anything apart from hello, and I just couldn't wait until I could get up and leave. And I came into these rooms, I understood that my dad really is a dry drunk, really struggles with people, really struggles with self-confidence, suffers from depression. And this program has honestly built a relationship with me and my father that we never had, because I can relate to him and how his head works, because I have the same thought process. I struggle in big groups, so I'm grateful for that. But my experience of step 8, I'll very quickly kind of talk about my other steps. Step 1, so when I came in for the first year, as I said when I started, I really didn't want to be in these rooms. I came here for the wrong reasons, to save my wife and my relationship, to kind of keep my parents quiet and my sister quiet, And it lasted for 63 days, of which I was insane over, because I used to do one meeting a week, never call anyone, picked up a sponsor I'd never ring, who'd text me daily, and I'm like, yeah, I'm alright. And I was just living clean, or being clean, living dirty. My head was very, very loud, and ultimately I relapsed. And it's hilarious because I always used to read in meetings how it works. And then whenever I'd get to the section that says, alcohol is a drug, I'm like, yeah, I never had a problem with alcohol. It's the really hard drugs. And that was my first relapse, and my behaviours were insane. And I came back into the rooms, I picked up one other thing rather than the whole shebang, and again, 60 to 80 days, I relapsed again. And then the third relapse, I recall I finally understood what powerlessness really kind of meant. Because I'd been clean for 80 days, my life was okay, my relationship with my wife was just starting to improve, and I was in my young daughter's life, and my parents were smiling for the first time in God knows how many years, and I just went, no, my life's alright, I don't have a problem. And then I used, my drug of no choice, and then my life just spiraled, and I was suicidal in the space of one day.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I went into this meeting, I just went, I relapsed again, and I want to kill myself. I've got one of my recovery friends who's probably like a brother to me. We were really close. We'd come through this stuff together, and there was these two blokes in that meeting who'd come in at the same time as me, and they were 11 and a half months clean, and they had a similar life story to mine, similar hectic use in carnage, and they were happy. They were smiling, and I just shared that I want to kill myself. And I went outside for a cigarette after I shared halfway through the meeting, and they came out as well. And and I finally got clean through resentment, because they said they were doing all this stuff that was suggested to me in every single meeting, and Kid Jack asked me, what are you doing? I went, yeah, none of them. And he went, yeah, I don't know why you ain't clean, geez. I went, alright, you prick, pardon my language, I'll show you this shit doesn't work. I'll take up commitments, and I went to my sponsor after the meeting, see you, I'm going to ring you. He went, okay, cool, I've been asking you for that for a year. I went, and I've taken commitments, I'll do the 90 and 90, and I'll start doing step work. He went, okay, fine. Good. So I'm glad. But I said it like a threat, and then, and I stayed. And I stayed through anger just to prove people that this didn't work. And 4.5 months later, I bumped into Jack again. He went, how's it going? I went, yeah, he worked. I'm 4.5 months clean. And then my journey continued. And step one was really, really powerful. It's taken me time to do my steps, because I have to really understand the step and also how it impacts and it works in my life. And unfortunately for me, step one, I turned it into a 4. The way that I do it is the old way through the basic text, where we have certain questions rather than green and gold. But there's a kind of a bolt onto that where my sponsor says he wants to know how I felt about it when I was doing these behaviours on these questions then, and how I feel about it now. And he sent me this feelings wheel. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but that stuff is not for the faint-hearted. And I realised that when I was doing these behaviours, this skullduggery, this manipulation, these harms, I never actually felt any guilt during my using. If anything, I actually felt glee, and I felt quite giddy. They used to get away with it. And then how I felt about it now was a lot of remorse and shame and guilt. But I saw that a lot of times drug had nothing to do with it. It was actually my behaviours and how I function as a human being. And then two was very difficult for me. I came with a preconception around religion, and all I kept hearing in the word God is a Christian God. I was forced to go to church, which kept me out of these rooms for a long time. I saw it as a cult. I didn't need much justification to really not be here. And my sponsor said to me one day, like, when have you ever heard Christian God? Or a rabbi, or a Catholic God? He went, it could be anything, Albi. Higher power can be a tree, it could be these meetings. And I went, okay. And it took me a bit of time to understand it, but I finally kind of understood. And to this day, my higher power that I trust in, that kind of always brings me back to sanity, are the people in these meetings, because they've been the ones that text me randomly when I'm having a crap day and my head's on me. They'll go for food with me and talk about their insanity that I can relate to, or tell me, actually, it's not that bad, mate. You're wasting, your brain power over something that's not that important. And then step 3, the only step I really enjoyed writing and struggle living, because my willpower is very strong. Albion, once you get clean a little bit, Albion knows best. That was the Albion 5 years ago. Now I'm coming up to 7 years. I can take care of this, finances. I can't hand this to my higher power and trust that it's going to be okay. But every time I take control, it's self-serving and self-seeking. It has to benefit me, which means I harm other people. So that's been a painful kind of lesson. And then 4, the greatest step I've done to really kind of boost my recovery, in order to kind of enjoy this new way of living, I have to get rid of my past damage and really see it for what it is. And it was a beautiful experience to really get honest with another human being and tell him my darkest stuff and him not judge me. If anything, just say, okay, I've heard it before, or I've done that. It was a really beautiful experience. Not when he finished, because he asked me, how do you feel? I went, no, different. I don't have this, oh my God. And I do want to stab you now because you know all this stuff. I said, I won't, but, I do feel like, you know all this stuff. But I started getting real release quite a lot in meetings, when I'd hear things around domestic violence, which was my story. I'd hear stories about people forcing their partners into abortions because they couldn't stop using or having affairs. That was my dark secrets. I used to hear about sexual abuse. That was my secret. And that stuff just wasn't really holding me back in meetings, acknowledged. And then 6, looking at my defects from 4 and knowing that, there's a higher power out there and a God of my understanding that can actually help me, or at least bring me to sanity. And then I came to my 8. It's difficult really to talk about 8 without 9. I remember when I did 8, because I took a lot of the harms from 4 and I transferred them to my 8. And at the top of my list were my parents, my wife, my sister and my oldest child, because my youngest wasn't born. I got clean. But for the first 18 months of my immediate life, I was, just an absolute animal, a monster. And it's really strange because when I first came in, I started properly getting clean. I was like, I can't wait to get to 8 and make an amends to these people. And you know what the weirdest thing is? I've not made amends to any of those people still. And I did step 8. And the reason why is because the situation with my parents has been when I first finally got clean, they really wanted to understand why I went the way I did. Because I come from a really loving background, hard-working parents, highly educated parents. I didn't really need for anything. But the cleaner I stayed, they don't want to talk about it anymore. Whenever I've kind of gone to approach this, I'll be like, no, you're right now, you're doing well. You're fine, it's fine, you're not that person. And with my wife, there's a section in step 8, and I heard from a fellow who I really get on with, is quite a few decades clean. And I learned from his experience. I was very close to making an amends with my wife about a year or 18 months ago. And I remember him sharing in this meeting around step 8 where he made an amends to his mum, who he really resented and hadn't gotten over that resentment. Step 8 says, we're making amends where we've actually forgiven them, forgiven ourselves. And then, his mum turned around, yeah, you're right, you were at fault. And he went, he just had no power. And I just remember, I don't want to make an amends to my wife right now, although she's at the top of my list, because I have a resentment with her right now because of something pointless, but it's just not really the right time. I did put myself on that list. It was last. I used to hear loads of different people's experiences. Some of them wouldn't. Some of them would put themselves at the top. But I have to acknowledge that I've also harmed myself. And I harmed myself a lot more towards the end because I could see the carnage I'd caused around me. And my using towards the end was to kill myself because I wasn't man enough to actually do it. And I was just hoping the drug would take care of that to really make an amends. But it was really, really kind of powerful to really write the list of amends. And the way that I did it, I remember, like my sponsor was like, if a name comes into your head, it comes into your head for a reason, write them. But my head works in a way where it will justify my behaviour still. And also if I have a resentment towards them where they've harmed me. And I really got stuck with 3 people that I really didn't want to add them, which was my auntie and 2 of my cousins. And my sponsor went, right, we'll just do it in 3 columns. We'll do the ones that you're really willing to do. We'll do ones that you might be prepared to do, and ones that 100% no, that you will just never do. And the weirdest thing is, God's honest truth, the first amends I ever made was one of the people I'd never make an amends to, which was my cousin. Because he apologised to me about his behaviours. And I just thought, well, if he's getting honest, it's got vulnerable. I think it's only fair. My program has taught me that I have to, accept and forgive. And I allowed him to kind of really vent a little bit as well. But step 8 is, it's a step that, the same as 9, it could take me for the rest of my life, those amends. But, what I know right now is that my program, it's always kind of held me when my head tells me not to do something because, through ego or I'll be harmed. I've not wanted to do any of the steps. They've always been painful apart from 3, but I know that when I make an amends, whichever way it goes, I've had good and bad, it's okay. That's just what's written for me, and I trust in my higher power that will hold me steady. But I'm willing to make them. That's what I learned. When I wrote that list, although at the time the ones I said I will never do, my experience has been that actually that was the first one I did, and it went okay. And even the ones that haven't, it's all right. From my side, I acknowledge the pain that I put them through, and I leave them alone now. I don't have to accept it or not accept it. I don't have to kind of fight them over it and try to convince them, because that's been a massive learning for me. I used to spend a lot of time in early recovery to chase people that I knew were never going to love me. And the people that were around me, I just leave them to the side. And it's okay. But that list was long. It was long. And it got longer towards the end of my user, because then everyone that came in my way, I was like a wrecking ball. Like a scene from Mad Max, where I just didn't care. I really didn't have any principles at all. I was the bloke where I was growing up in a certain way with principles and morals, and the drugs removed them all from me. I would do a certain behaviour, like, okay, but just don't repeat it, and I'll do it again. And then it just became norm. And I'm like, okay, but I've done this, but I won't do this. And that's what kind of 8 taught me, when I'm in active addiction, and not even without a drug in me, because I had an experience 4.5 years clean, where I almost tore my life to the ground, clean, with a program apparently, doing meetings, sponsoring people, and I was acting on behaviours and causing more freaking harms. And I was like, how am I here? How did this happen? Because I allowed it to through my behaviours, and the harms started happening again. So anyway, I think I might have run over, but step 8 is, what this program gives me is the ability to actually make amends, and I do make those amends. I used to go to a meeting in Hainault for 2 years, because it's actually, I would go through Brentwood to go to this meeting, so I would stop at my parents and see them. I don't have to make them amends by big gestures, but when I go to see my parents, my phone stays in the fucking car. It doesn't come with me, because then I'm not paying attention to them. When I go out with my wife and my daughters, my phone stays at home, or it stays in the car, so I'm actually present. I don't need to make big gestures. I just have to be present, and that's the thing that's taken me a long time to actually realise, that people want me in their lives, and I don't have to be this clown. I don't have to have a drug in me or act in behaviours to please them. I just have to just incrementally try and improve, and the steps, and especially step 8, by making that amends and people feeling comfortable to be honest with me, it allows them a voice, and allows me also to process where they're coming from. I am not always right. As much as my head tells me I'm always right, unfortunately I tend to be wrong quite frequently. And that's okay. At least I'm aware of it now. I was never aware of it before. I hope you got something out of it. If you haven't, there's a following step after 8, which is a 10. You can write to your sponsor and moan about it. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Alvin.